April 8, 1917. The skies above Europe were about to witness something that would change the course of aerial combat forever. Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, was at the peak of his powers, already a legend among pilots. But what led him to this moment? How did this young man from Germany become the most feared ace of World War I? Tonight, we're diving into the life and legacy of the Red Baron through his most iconic victories, his battles in the air, and the moment everything changed. Before Manfred von Richthofen became the Red Baron, he was just a young man with a passion for flying and a family legacy in the military. Born in 1892 in Breslau, Germany, he was raised with the sense that duty and honor came first, something that would later shape his approach to war. But what would life have been like for young Manfred, not yet a legendary ace, with no idea that his name would soon be on the lips of every soldier in the sky? Manfred's early years were not marked by the immediate promise of greatness. He was the eldest of 4 children in a family with a strong military background. His father, Albrecht, was a successful officer in the German army, and his grandfather had served with distinction during the Napoleonic Wars. These familial ties to the military created a natural environment for Manfred to grow up with a deep sense of discipline and duty. However, rather than being pushed into the military immediately, Manfred initially pursued a more traditional upbringing, steeped in education and physical fitness, which would later serve him well in his military career. In his early years, Manfred was not particularly interested in following his family's footsteps into the military. He was a boy who enjoyed sports and the outdoors, with a particular passion for hunting, a skill that would prove invaluable during his later aerial battles, as the precision and patience required to hunt translated well into his sharpshooting abilities. As a young man, he was described as quiet and introspective, often lost in thought, a stark contrast to the boisterous personalities of his peers. While this might have been a sign of his internal focus, it was also a foreshadowing of the contemplative nature he would carry into his future as a fighter pilot, where he would meticulously plan every action with calculated precision. Manfred's introduction to the military came when he joined the German army in 1911, just before the outbreak of World War I. However, he didn't immediately take to the skies. Initially, he enrolled in the cavalry, a decision that seemed fitting for a young man of his background. The cavalry, after all, had a storied history and was seen as a prestigious branch of the military. Yet, it was during his time in the cavalry that Manfred discovered his true passion. His time on horseback ignited a love for speed and agility, which, in hindsight, was more suited to the world of aviation than the stolid nature of ground warfare. When the war began, Manfred, like many young soldiers, was thrust into the violence of battle. However, his true calling came not in the trenches, but in the sky. He made the transition to aviation in 1915, initially training as an observer before becoming a pilot. This decision would change the course of his life and, in many ways, the history of aerial warfare. But even before he took to the skies as a fighter pilot, Richthofen's reputation as a soldier was already growing. His skills as a marksman, honed during his hunting days, made him an excellent candidate for a pilot. It wasn't long before his natural instincts and sharp eye turned him into one of the most deadly aerial combatants in history. Although he started as a relatively unknown figure in the German Air Force, his rise to fame was swift. His early experiences flying were marked by a series of dogfights where his hunting instincts and tactical mind began to shine. But it wasn't until he became part of the elite flying squadron, Jasta 11, under the mentorship of ace fighter pilot Oswald Boelke. This was a pivotal moment in his early years, as the mentorship and camaraderie within Jasta 11 pushed him to become the fighter pilot that history would remember. But even then, the Red Baron was not yet a legend. He was simply a young man doing his duty, unaware of the fame and reverence that would soon surround him. Before he was an ace, before he soared through the skies with an unmistakable red Fokker Dr. Eye, Manfred von Richthofen was a cavalryman. It's hard to imagine, right? A soldier used to riding horseback, swinging a saber in hand, suddenly trading that in for a cockpit. But that's exactly what happened. The year is 1915, and Germany's push for air dominance was just taking off, literally. Manfred von Richthofen's transition from cavalry to aviation marked a pivotal shift in his life. As a young man, the cavalry seemed to offer him everything: tradition, honor, and the thrill of fast-moving action. The cavalry played a critical role in the early days of the war, and Manfred was trained to fight with distinction. However, as the war escalated, it became clear that modern warfare was evolving, and the traditional cavalry was beginning to lose its edge against the new technological force emerging in the skies. The shift from the horse to the airplane was not an easy one. Manfred had to learn the complexities of aviation, a field that was still in its infancy. Initially, he was assigned as an observer, the position where the role of a soldier was that of a lookout, scanning the horizon for enemy targets. This position gave him a unique perspective on aerial combat, and he began to develop the strategic thinking that would serve him later as a pilot. Being an observer was an essential role, but it wasn't enough for Manfred. He soon realized that to truly make a mark in this new era of warfare, he needed to be the one behind the controls of the plane, not just the one watching from above. In 1915, after some persistence, Manfred transferred to the air service and began pilot training. Initially, he trained in basic aviation, learning how to handle the cumbersome aircraft of the time. At first, the flight experience was a steep learning curve. The biplanes and triplanes of World War I were vastly different from the steady, familiar rhythm of riding a horse. The planes were noisy, unpredictable, and at times downright dangerous. But Manfred's keen instincts and determination saw him through. Once he was officially a pilot, he joined the squadron of one of Germany's most esteemed flying aces, Oswald Boelcke. Under Boelcke's mentorship, Manfred began to develop the skills necessary to become an effective combat pilot. Boelcke, who was known for his meticulous approach to aerial combat, taught Manfred the importance of teamwork, strategy, and precision in dogfights, lessons that would prove invaluable when Manfred started to rack up victories of his own. Though he had only recently taken to the skies, Manfred's natural ability for combat soon began to shine. He had been raised in an environment where precision and discipline were emphasized, qualities that made him excel at aerial combat. His hunting background had taught him the importance of patience and observation, skills that translated directly into his aerial tactics. The calmness he exhibited when faced with danger in the air was unmatched. Soon, Manfred became known for his fearless approach to dogfighting. His ability to assess the battlefield from the cockpit, combined with his hunting instincts, gave him an edge over his opponents. However, it wasn't just his instincts that made him stand out. It was his unwavering commitment to learning and improving his craft. Every flight was an opportunity to perfect his technique, and each dogfight was an invaluable lesson in the art of aerial warfare. By the end of 1915, Manfred von Richthofen was beginning to make a name for himself, but he was still far from the Red Baron of legend. His journey from a humble cavalryman to one of the most feared and respected fighter pilots in history was just beginning. Little did he know, the coming year would mark the start of his meteoric rise, as he would soon become a legend in the skies, an unstoppable force who would shape the future of aerial combat and forever change the way war was fought from above. Fast forward to 1916, and Manfred von Richthofen is now sitting in the cockpit of a plane, flying above the chaos of trench warfare. But let's be honest. At first, this whole aerial combat thing was new and terrifying. It was all about precision, speed, and judgment, things no cavalry officer would ever have been prepared for. But Richthofen quickly adapted. What was going through his mind as he faced his first aerial dogfight? knowing that the sky was now his battleground. Manfred von Richthofen had already experienced the horrors of war on the ground. He had witnessed the bloodshed, the noise, and the chaos that defined trench warfare. But the transition to the air was something altogether different. There were no trenches to hide behind, no steady ground beneath his feet. Instead, the sky offered him a new kind of battlefield, one where every move mattered and where death could come from any direction at any moment. The weight of this new reality hit him immediately as he climbed into the cockpit of his first fighter plane. At first, the prospect of aerial combat must have seemed overwhelming. Flying a plane in a war zone was unlike anything he had experienced before. The cockpit was cramped and noisy, with the engine roaring loudly in his ears. His hands gripped the controls, and his eyes scanned the skies for any sign of enemy aircraft. He was no longer on horseback with a saber in hand, commanding a cavalry charge. Instead, he was alone, high above the earth, in a machine that could easily plummet to the ground if not handled with care. His first encounter with aerial combat came unexpectedly. Manfred was still relatively new to flying and dogfighting, where pilots engaged in intense, high-speed, close-quarters combat was a completely different skill set from what he had learned as an observer and a cavalryman. The rules of engagement were different. No longer was he in control of ground troops, but instead he had to rely on his ability to think quickly, anticipate his opponent's moves, and execute maneuvers that required incredible precision. He had only seconds to react when an enemy plane suddenly appeared on his tail. At first, Richthofen's reaction to the situation was a mix of hesitation and uncertainty. However, his instincts kicked in. His hunting background, where patience and sharp shooting were critical, quickly became an asset. He understood the importance of remaining calm, of waiting for the right moment, and of taking advantage of small openings in the battle. Unlike many rookie pilots who panicked at the first sight of an enemy plane, Richthofen managed to maintain his composure. His experience in the cavalry had taught him how to stay focused and not let the chaos of the battlefield overwhelm him. The first aerial dogfight was intense. Manfred's heart pounded as he executed his first evasive maneuver, a sharp turn that forced his opponent to overshoot. It was in that moment that he realized that aerial combat wasn't about brute force, it was about finesse, timing, and the ability to anticipate the moves of your opponent. After the initial scare, Manfred quickly adapted to the rhythm of the air, learning how to read his enemy's movements and calculating his own strikes with growing confidence. That first dogfight ended with Richthofen's plane still intact and his heart racing, but it was far from his last. In the following months, Manfred would grow more and more comfortable in the cockpit, becoming a master of the dogfight. Each encounter sharpened his skills, and with each victory, he built a reputation that would soon make him one of the most feared pilots in history. Richthofen's early experiences in aerial combat taught him valuable lessons: the importance of precision, the necessity of remaining calm under pressure, and the reality that victory in the skies was not about raw power, but about strategy and skill. Of his career, and would lay the foundation for his legendary success in the skies. As he continued to accumulate victories, his legend as the Red Baron began to take shape, and the world would soon know the name Manfred von Richthofen as one of the greatest fighter pilots in history. When we talk about the Red Baron, we often think of his striking red Fokker Dr. I triplane, the one that would soon become synonymous with fear in the Allied forces. But what made this plane so special? Why did Manfred's choice of aircraft become more than just a personal preference? It became a symbol. As Richthofen's kills mounted, the sound of that engine began to send shivers down the spines of Allied pilots. The Fokker Dr. I, a small and agile triplane, became the aircraft that defined Manfred von Richthofen's career and solidified his place as one of the most feared and respected pilots of World War I. When Richthofen first took to the skies in the Dr. I, he had already earned a reputation as a skilled and lethal fighter pilot. However, The combination of his exceptional skills and the unique characteristics of the Fokker Doctor, I turned him into a living legend. But what was it about this particular aircraft that set it apart from the many others used during the war? The Fokker Doctor I, designed by the Dutch engineer Anthony Fokker, was a revolutionary aircraft for its time. Unlike traditional biplanes, which featured two wings stacked on top of each other, the Doctor I had three wings. This triplane design was a game changer, providing unparalleled maneuverability in tight spaces. The extra lift from the third wing allowed for quicker turns and more precise control, especially during dogfights. For a fighter pilot like Richthofen, who relied on quick, tactical maneuvers to outsmart his enemies, the Doctor I offered an advantage that no other plane could match. Its light frame and responsive controls made it the perfect match for Richthofen's aggressive style of combat. But it wasn't just the aircraft's design that made the Fokker Doctor I stand out. The plane's distinctive red color played a crucial role in its legacy. Richthofen's decision to paint his aircraft red, later dubbed the Red Baron's plane, was both a tactical and psychological move. While other pilots flew aircraft in various shades of gray, green, and brown, Richthofen's vibrant red triplane was impossible to ignore. The color made his plane easily recognizable from the ground, and more importantly, it became a symbol of his deadly prowess. To the Allied pilots, the sight of the Red Baron and his crimson Doctor I in the skies was a harbinger of doom. The plane's striking appearance became synonymous with death, and it is said that many Allied pilots would take a deep breath when they saw the red triplane bearing down on them. The engine of the Fokker Doctor I was a modified 110 horsepower Oberursel UR2 rotary engine, providing enough power to keep the aircraft nimble in aerial combat. While it was not the fastest plane in the air, its quick turning radius and stability at lower speeds made it deadly in the close-range dogfights that were the hallmark of World War I aerial combat. The Doctor I's ability to outmaneuver enemy aircraft, especially in tight spaces, allowed Richthofen to take advantage of his enemy's weaknesses and quickly dispatch them with pinpoint precision. As Richthofen's kill count continued to climb, the Fokker Doctor I became a symbol of fear in the sky. Allied forces began to develop strategies to counter the Red Baron's reign, but the aircraft's agility and Richthofen's impeccable flying skills made him nearly untouchable. His success in the Doctor I was a result of both the aircraft's unique characteristics and his own talent as a fighter pilot. But it was the psychological impact of the Red Baron and his iconic red triplane that made him a legend. Ultimately, the Fokker Doctor I wasn't just a plane, it was a key part of Richthofen's mystique and success. It gave him the advantage he needed to dominate the skies and strike fear into the hearts of the Allies. The Red Baron's reputation grew, and so did the legacy of the Fokker Doctor I, which remains one of the most iconic aircraft in history. The combination of Richthofen's talent, the unique capabilities of the Fokker Doctor I, and the symbol it became marked the beginning of his legendary rise as the greatest fighter pilot of World War I. The Red Baron didn't just fight alone. He was the leader of the Flying Circus, a group of elite pilots who struck fear into the hearts of the enemy. What was it about this group that made them so effective? Was it the boldness of their attacks, the coordination between pilots, or the sheer terror they instilled with every swoop from the clouds? What made these men legendary, and how did their success contribute to the psychological warfare of World War I? The Flying Circus, officially known as Jagdgeschwader 1JG-1, was a formidable squadron of fighter pilots under the command of Manfred von Richthofen. The squadron's name, Flying Circus, was coined by the Allied forces, who were struck by the sight of the vibrant, colorful aircraft that made up the squadron. Each plane was uniquely painted with bold colors and patterns, giving the squadron a circus-like appearance in the sky. This flamboyant style, however, was not just for show. It served as a psychological weapon, making the squadron more intimidating and recognizable. Richthofen's leadership was key to the squadron's success. He was known for his tactical brilliance and his ability to inspire loyalty in his men. He instilled a sense of discipline and camaraderie, which was crucial to their effectiveness as a unit. Under his leadership, the Flying Circus became a symbol of precision and deadly force. Each pilot in the squadron was an elite fighter, highly skilled in the art of aerial combat. They were not just individuals flying into battle, they were a coordinated force, each playing a specific role in their tactical maneuvers. The squadron's success was built on the concept of teamwork. The Flying Circus was not simply a group of pilots flying independently. They operated as a cohesive unit. Richthofen's tactics emphasized close coordination, with pilots working together to trap and overpower their targets. The idea was to make sure that no enemy pilot could escape once the squadron was engaged. The squadron's pilots often operated in coordinated formations, where they could protect each other and launch synchronized attacks from different angles. This teamwork, combined with the deadly precision of each individual pilot, made the Flying Circus a fearsome force in the air. One of the most striking aspects of the Flying Circus was the psychological warfare it waged. The Red Baron and his pilots didn't just engage in dogfights, they used their presence to instill terror in the hearts of their enemies. The sight of the colorful planes appearing from the clouds was often enough to make even the most experienced Allied pilots hesitate. The Red Baron's reputation, combined with the squadron's tactical prowess, created an almost mythical aura around the Flying Circus. It wasn't just about the kills they amassed, it was the fear they instilled with every encounter. The squadron's success was also due to the experience and professionalism of its pilots. While Richthofen was undoubtedly the leader, he was supported by a group of highly skilled and fearless men, many of whom would go on to become legendary in their own right. Pilots like Werner Voss, Kurt Wolff, and Hermann Göring, who would later rise to infamy in the Nazi regime, were part of this elite group. Each of these men was a highly decorated ace in his own right, and together they formed a deadly force that overwhelmed their enemies with both skill and psychological tactics. The Flying Circus's success in World War I was not just due to its technical capabilities, but also its ability to manipulate the enemy's emotions. The squadron's boldness in battle, its eerie presence in the skies, and its reputation for efficiency made it a major force in shaping the psychological aspect of aerial combat. The Allies were not just fighting against skilled pilots, they were fighting against a symbol of fear. Richthofen and his men didn't just fight to win, they fought to dominate, to break the spirit of the enemy before the first shots were even fired. The Flying Circus proved that in warfare, psychological dominance could be as powerful as physical strength. As Richthofen's kills mounted, the Flying Circus became synonymous with the Red Baron himself, a living legend in the skies. But it was the collective strength of the squadron, combined with their bold tactics, that ensured their place in history. The Flying Circus didn't just win battles, they became an integral part of the war's psychological landscape, leaving a lasting impact on both their allies and enemies. By the end of 1916, the Red Baron was no longer a novice. He had already scored his first major victory, and word of his skill spread like wildfire through the ranks of both Allied and German forces. But what was it like for Manfred when that first enemy aircraft came down under his fire? Was there exhilaration, a sense of accomplishment, or perhaps, like many pilots, a deep sense of cold, detached professionalism? Manfred von Richthofen's first major victory marked a significant turning point in his career and set the stage for his legendary rise as the most feared fighter pilot of World War I. But for the Red Baron, that first kill wasn't simply a moment of glory, it was a testament to his relentless dedication, keen instincts, and meticulous approach to aerial combat. As his first kill unfolded, Manfred must have experienced a blend of emotions. The rush of victory, the satisfaction of overcoming the enemy, and a deep recognition that he had taken the first step towards something much greater. The victim of his first kill was a French aircraft, a type he had already become familiar with during his time as an observer. On September 17, 1916, Richthofen, then part of the newly formed Jagdstaffel II, was on a patrol when he encountered a French aircraft piloted by Lieutenant Victor Lemoyne. The French pilot was flying a Morane Saulnier L, a monoplane, and had no idea that the Red Baron was closing in from behind. Richthofen's early training, both in the cavalry and as an observer, gave him an edge in recognizing his target's weaknesses and opportunities. As he lined up his shot, there was no rush, no hesitation, just calm focus as he squeezed the trigger and sent the French plane spiraling toward the ground. What went through Manfred's mind as he watched the plane fall from the sky? There's no telling exactly how he felt in that moment, but one thing was certain: the cold, calculating professionalism he had honed in his earlier lure and training would have taken over. Many pilots, after their first kill, experienced a euphoric rush, the thrill of knowing they had taken a life and claimed victory. But for Richthofen, who had spent his life absorbing the disciplines of military duty, this victory was likely seen through a more detached lens. He was trained to be a soldier first, a fighter second. His emotional response would have been one of quiet satisfaction and acknowledgement that his skill had been proven. There was no room for unnecessary celebration or self-indulgence in the face of such a grim duty. Richthofen's ability to detach himself emotionally from the act of killing became one of his defining traits. While many of his peers in the cockpit reveled in the excitement of battle, he approached it with a sharp sense of discipline. This approach, born out of his strict military upbringing, allowed him to focus on the task at hand without the distraction of emotions clouding his judgment. His success wasn't just due to his natural flying skills, but his ability to remain calm and methodical in the chaos of aerial combat. What set Manfred apart from his fellow pilots was his ability to take each encounter as a learning experience, rather than bask in the glory of his kills. His first major victory was just one of many, and each success added to his growing reputation as a deadly and efficient combatant. He didn't see himself as a hero. Instead, he viewed himself as a soldier doing his duty. But as the months passed and his kill count grew, so too did his legend. The Red Baron's first major victory was the moment everything changed, both for him and for the course of aerial warfare in World War I. From that moment onward, Manfred von Richthofen's name would be forever etched in history, not just as a skilled pilot, but as the man who defined the art of aerial combat. As the years went by, Manfred von Richthofen refined his skills as a pilot. He wasn't just any fighter ace, he was an artist. What did it take to score 80 kills? Precision, patience, and a profound understanding of the enemy. But let's not romanticize it. This was not a glamorous pursuit. Aerial combat during World War I was brutal, and for every victory, there was a cost. How did the Red Baron maintain his focus while constantly fighting death from above? Manfred von Richthofen's rise to the status of the world's greatest fighter pilot was not a result of mere luck or instinct. It was the product of an intense, methodical approach to aerial combat. Unlike many of his peers, who often relied on sheer daring or the thrill of the chase, Richthofen was a master of precision, patience, and strategy. His reputation was built not just on his ability to shoot down enemy aircraft, but on his tactical brilliance and cold, calculated decision-making. The process of scoring a kill in the skies during World War I was far from glamorous. The aircraft of the time were fragile machines, slow, noisy, and difficult to control in the heat of battle. Pilots were exposed to the elements, and the risk of death was ever present. The skies were filled with constant danger, whether from enemy fire, mechanical failure, or mid-air collisions. Aerial combat in these early days of aviation was a brutal game of survival, where every encounter was a life-or-death struggle. Richthofen understood this better than anyone, and it was this recognition that allowed him to maintain his razor-sharp focus in the heat of battle. The secret to Richthofen's success was his meticulous planning and his ability to anticipate the enemy's moves. Unlike other pilots, who often dove straight into dogfights without much thought, Richthofen studied his prey before engaging. He was known to watch enemy squadrons from a distance, identifying weaknesses in their formations and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His patience allowed him to wait for the right opportunity, often attacking from above or behind, where the element of surprise was on his side. Richthofen's skill as a marksman was another factor that contributed to his success. He knew the importance of precision when firing his weapons. In the heat of a dogfight, it's easy to be caught up in the chaos. But the Red Baron maintained control and focus, waiting for the perfect shot. His approach was calculated. Never waste ammunition, never take a shot unless you were certain it would count. This meticulous attention to detail and his ability to stay calm under pressure helped him maintain his legendary accuracy in combat. But what truly set Richthofen apart was his understanding of aerial tactics. He wasn't just a pilot, he was a strategist. He became a master of the art of the ambush. Richthofen often employed the tactic of attacking his opponents when they were least prepared, outnumbering them, taking the higher ground, and engaging them at the moment when they were most vulnerable. His skill in forming ambushes and working with his squadron made him a formidable adversary in the skies. His leadership also played a crucial role in his success, as he instilled in his pilots the same discipline and strategic thinking that guided his own actions. Yet, for all his skill and precision, aerial combat took its toll on Richthofen. The constant pressure to perform, the fear of death hanging over him with each flight, and the emotional strain of losing comrades weighed heavily on him. Despite the thrill of victory, each kill brought him closer to the realization that the risks of war were never far behind. He understood that no victory was guaranteed, that, despite his skill, he was always just one shot away from joining the ranks of the fallen pilots he had once hunted. In the end, Manfred von Richthofen's reputation as the Red Baron wasn't just built on his remarkable kills, but on his ability to remain calm and composed in a world filled with chaos and violence. He was a master of the art of aerial combat, combining precision, patience, and tactical brilliance to carve out his place in history. The Red Baron's legacy continues to live on not just as a fighter ace, but as a symbol of the perfect balance between skill and strategy in the unforgiving skies of World War I. April 21, 1918. Manfred von Richthofen's last flight was as dramatic as any battle he had ever fought. A single bullet, fired from the ground, would change the course of history and silence one of the most famous names in military aviation. But what led up to that fateful day? How did the Red Baron, always so calculating in the air, find himself vulnerable? Could anything have prevented his tragic end, or was it simply fate? By the spring of 1918, Manfred von Richthofen had become a living legend. With 80 confirmed kills under his belt, he was the top-scoring fighter pilot of World War I, a symbol of German air superiority. His unmatched skill and deadly precision had made him the target of Allied pilots who sought to bring down the Red Baron. And as the war dragged on, the intensity of aerial combat only increased. Despite his fame, Richthofen was not immune to the mounting pressures of the conflict. His squadron, Jasta 11, had suffered heavy losses, and the relentless nature of the war weighed heavily on him. But he remained a formidable force in the air, adapting to every challenge with the same cold professionalism that had defined his career. Richthofen took to the skies for what would be his final mission. The weather was clear, and the Red Baron, flying his iconic Fokker Dr. I triplane, led his squadron on a sortie near the Somme River, deep in Allied territory. The mission began like many others, with Richthofen's squadron engaging in a fierce dogfight with a group of Allied aircraft. The skies above the Western Front were filled with the roar of engines and the whistling of bullets as the battle raged on. In the heat of the engagement, Richthofen's tactical brilliance once again came to the forefront. His eagle-eyed precision allowed him to bring down several enemy planes, and it seemed as though another victory was within reach. However, despite his skill and the protection of his squadron, this would be the day that fate intervened. As Richthofen pursued an enemy aircraft, he inadvertently flew deeper into enemy territory, becoming more isolated from the rest of his squadron. His focus on the kill left him vulnerable. This mistake would prove fatal. At that moment, a single shot rang out from the ground, a lucky hit from a soldier in the trenches below, aimed at the fast-moving target high in the sky. The bullet struck Richthofen in the chest, piercing his heart and causing immediate, fatal damage. The impact of the shot was devastating, and Richthofen's plane began to spiral uncontrollably toward the earth. Despite his best efforts to regain control, he couldn't prevent the inevitable. The Red Baron crashed near the village of Vaux-sur-Somme, and his life was tragically cut short at the age of 25. The man who had become a symbol of German might, the ace who had turned aerial combat into an art form, was gone. The news of Manfred von Richthofen's death sent shockwaves through both the German and Allied forces. For the Germans, the loss of their most famous pilot was a blow to morale. For the Allies, it marked the end of an era in aerial warfare. But the circumstances surrounding his death, how a single bullet from the ground could fell, the greatest pilot of the war, left many wondering. Could it have been avoided? The answer, as history shows, is no. In the chaos of war, fate had played its hand, and even the most skilled and calculated of pilots could not escape its grasp. Richthofen had made his final flight, and with it, he had sealed his legacy. The Red Baron had fallen, but his name would forever be etched into the annals of aviation history, a reminder of the price of fame and the inevitability of fate in the unforgiving skies of World War I. The world reacted to the death of the Red Baron with a mix of shock and reverence. While the Germans mourned their most successful pilot, the Allies saw it as a major victory. But what happened next? How did Manfred's death affect the morale of the forces in the sky? And did the Red Baron's legacy grow stronger after his death? How was he remembered? And how did his death ultimately alter the course of the war? When Manfred von Richthofen was shot down on April 21, 1918, his death sent ripples through both the Allied and Central Powers. To the Germans, the loss was devastating. Richthofen was not only their most decorated and skilled pilot, but he had also become a symbol of German pride and military prowess. His legacy was woven into the very fabric of their identity in the war. The death of the Red Baron left a void that was impossible to fill. Though his squadron, Jagdgeschwader I, continued to fight, it lacked the charismatic leadership that had made them so successful. His death was a blow to morale, and for many German soldiers and airmen, it marked the end of an era. For years, the Red Baron had been their greatest adversary, an elusive figure who was credited with 80 kills. His reputation had preceded him in every battle. The sight of his crimson Fokker Doctor eye on the horizon sent a wave of dread through the Allied pilots. To finally see him fall in battle was a moment of triumph. Allied pilots felt a sense of relief, as the greatest threat in the sky had been eliminated. The British pilot who claimed responsibility for the kill, Captain Arthur Roy Brown, was hailed as a hero, though controversy remained over whether Brown's bullet or the ground-based fire had delivered the fatal shot. Despite the celebrations in Allied ranks, Richthofen's death did not dampen the morale of the German forces for long. If anything, his death intensified the myth surrounding him. His legacy grew exponentially after his passing, and he quickly became a larger-than-life figure, not just in Germany, but across the world. His success in the air, the sheer number of kills, and his calculated approach to aerial combat made him a subject of fascination. The Red Baron became more than a soldier. He became a symbol of courage, skill, and the harsh realities of war. Richthofen's death also gave rise to an enduring legacy that would transcend the war itself. In Germany, he was mourned as a national hero, and the story of his life and career became a staple of post-war German culture. He was remembered as a symbol of German fighting spirit, a hero whose fate had been sealed by the brutal realities of war. His name became synonymous with air combat and was spoken with a mixture of awe and respect. Over time, his legacy would grow, not just in Germany but in the wider world, as the tale of the Red Baron would be immortalized in books, films, and songs. For the Allies, however, his death marked the end of an era of fear and fascination. Richthofen's death didn't erase the pain of the war, but it provided a sense of closure for many who had lived in the shadow of his terror. His legacy, however, became a part of the larger story of World War I, and as the war dragged on, it shifted from being a symbol of the enemy to one of the most iconic figures of the conflict. Richthofen's death also had an indirect effect on the course of the war. The German Luftwaffe struggled to replace him with a figure of equal skill and influence. While his death did not mark the immediate collapse of German air superiority, it certainly weakened the morale of the German air forces. The Red Baron had been an indispensable leader, and without him, the effectiveness of their aerial campaigns began to wane. Ultimately, Manfred von Richthofen's death didn't just change the course of the war in the short term. It ensured that his legacy would endure far beyond the final days of the conflict. His name became synonymous with air combat and heroism, and his legend continues to captivate people even today. While his death marked the end of his personal story, it solidified his place in history, forever altering the way aerial combat was understood and remembered. The Red Baron's legacy would continue to inspire and awe future generations, making him a true legend of the skies. Today, the name Red Baron is a symbol of both skill and terror in the skies. But what makes his legacy last more than 100 years after his death? Was it his incredible skill, his famous red plane, or the sheer impact he had on aerial combat? What would Manfred von Richthofen think of the legacy he left behind? Would he have been surprised at the admiration he still receives, or would he have shrugged it off as just another day at the office? Manfred von Richthofen's legacy as the Red Baron is far more than just a footnote in the history of World War I. His name has become synonymous with the golden age of aerial combat, and his story continues to captivate the imagination of people worldwide. But what made his legacy endure beyond the trenches of war and into the popular consciousness for more than a century? It's easy to attribute Richthofen's lasting legacy to his impressive kill count 80 confirmed aerial victories. At the time, this was an almost unprecedented number, a record that many believed would never be surpassed. However, the number of kills alone doesn't explain the reverence with which he is remembered. What truly made him stand out was his approach to aerial combat. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who relied on sheer aggression or brute force, Richthofen treated aerial combat as an art form. He meticulously planned each move, used his squadron with precision, and created a style of combat that emphasized patience, observation, and calculated strikes. He wasn't just a skilled pilot, he was a tactician, capable of reading the flow of battle from the sky and making decisions that kept him one step ahead of his opponents. Richthofen's choice of the Fokker Dr. I triplane, with its striking red paint, only added to his mythos. The red plane became a symbol of fear and inevitability in the skies. Allies saw it coming and knew that death was often not far behind. This image of the Red Baron, with his unique plane soaring through the air, became more than just a physical reality. It turned into a symbol of German military prowess. The psychological impact of his presence was immense, and for every victory, his legend grew. The Red Baron's success was not just about tactical superiority. It was about the aura of invincibility that surrounded him, a product of his skill and his persona. But would Richthofen have been surprised at the lasting admiration for his legacy? Perhaps, considering the stoic nature of the man, he might have brushed it off as another part of the war effort, just another facet of his duty. After all, he was a soldier, and for him, his place in history was likely an afterthought compared to the task at hand. winning the war. He wasn't in the business of seeking fame. He was in the business of doing his job, and doing it well. In fact, there are accounts that show Richthofen was deeply focused on the mission rather than the accolades. His personal philosophy was centered around duty and precision, and while he may have recognized the admiration he received, he likely would have viewed it as the natural result of his professional approach. That said, Richthofen's legacy continues to grow, not only because of his incredible skill, but also because of the times in which he lived. World War I was a transformative period in military history, and aerial combat was a new frontier. Richthofen's contribution to the evolution of aerial tactics cannot be overstated. He showed the world that air warfare was not just about firepower, it was about strategy, foresight, and coordination. Today, the Red Baron is not just a name in history books, he is a cultural icon. He remains a subject of fascination for historians, filmmakers, and aviation enthusiasts alike. From movies and documentaries to books and reenactments, Richthofen's story continues to inspire and intrigue. His name lives on not only as a testament to the deadly skills of a fighter pilot, but also as a reminder of the power of legend in shaping history. Richthofen's legacy is also a reminder of the human cost of war. The very skills and tactics that made him a hero of the skies also contributed to the horrors of World War I. His story is one of talent and determination, but also of tragedy, as it serves as a stark reminder of the toll that war takes on both its victors and its victims. In the end, the Red Baron's legacy is defined by the fusion of his extraordinary talents, the mystique surrounding his red triplane, and the psychological impact he had on both his enemies and his comrades. His story is a reflection of the changing face of warfare and the indelible mark that a single individual can leave on the world. The Red Baron's place in history is secure not just as a pilot, but as a legend who changed aerial combat forever.